conclude. Our virtual event today is an X Factor conversation with one of the icons of our industry, Dr. Bob Metcalfe, the inventor of the Ethernet. During this session, Dr. Metcalfe will speak with Dr. S.K. Ramesh, the 2016 IEEE-HKN president, about why he chose the path he did and what he's working on now. If you would like to post on Facebook about this event, please use the hashtags the HKN Experience and HKNx2020. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Ramesh.
Thank you so much, Stacy, and good afternoon, good evening, good day, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are in the world. Happy Founders Day 2020. IEEE-HKN is 116 years young, and since the merger, just 10 years young. So we're about to enter our teenage years in the coming decade. It is an honor and a privilege to be hosting our speaker today, the X Factor conversation with Professor Robert Metcalfe. Professor Metcalfe is a professor of innovation and entrepreneurship and the Murchison Fellow of Free Enterprise in the Cockrell School of Engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. As you heard from Stacy, he's an internet pioneer and entrepreneur, founding and growing the multi-billion-dollar networking company 3Com, which is now part of Hewlett-Packard. Professor Metcalfe is a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and in 2003 received the National Medal of Technology and Innovation. Bob, it's great to see you again virtually. It's hard to believe how the world has changed since we met last November in Boston when you were honored as an eminent member of IEEE-HKN. How are you today?
I'm great. Isn't it great we have the internet so that we can continue to meet despite COVID?
It is amazing, and we have to thank you in no small measure, Bob, for making all these technologies available that came from that little spark that you had. So I want to begin the conversation today, Bob, by having you tell us and the audience a little bit about the work that you're doing at the University of Texas, Austin.
So for 10 years, I've been working on the startup ecosystem at the University of Texas at Austin, which also includes the startup ecosystem of Austin, which also includes the startup ecosystem of Texas. So I've been working to stimulate the growth and effectiveness of this startup ecosystem. When I first arrived 10 years ago, Greg Fenves, who was then Dean of Engineering, Fenves has since been promoted to president of UT Austin, and now he's left UT Austin, and he's at Emory. He's now the president of Emory. But he told me that, number one, I couldn't do entrepreneurship at the University of Texas at Austin without doing it in the city of Austin. That is, the ecosystems overlap and are mutually reinforcing. He also said that I should ignore the silos of the university. You know, the universities are divided into schools and colleges and departments and so on, and that this is a major obstacle to innovation, and I should just ignore the silos and pretend they did not exist. And then the third advice he gave was that I should work imbue entrepreneurial thinking in the minds of the faculty. So that's what I've been doing for 10 years. One of the processes is I go out, we have 3,000 faculty members, is to go out hunting for successful research that might or might not result in or use a startup to commercialize. And then finding one of those is to convince the professor, and I focus on professor-led innovations. We should return to why I don't do so much. I then create an opportunity for the professor to present his or her first deck idea of how they would take their research and commercialize it. And then if they pass that step, I might give them a small innovation grant to their project, and then might mentor them a bit, and then might help them staff their startup, and then off they go into the wild blue yonder. So I've been doing that for almost 10 years now.
Wow, it sounds really exciting, Bob. And you're a member of the National Academy of Engineering, and this is from a publication that came out of NAE in 2008. And at that time, there was a concern about the number of students coming into the STEM disciplines. So NAE came up with this publication called Changing the Conversation that I'm sure you've seen. And I just want to share a paragraph from that with you. It says, "No profession unleashes the spirit of innovation like engineering. From research to real-world applications, engineers are constantly discovering how to improve our lives by creating bold new solutions that connect science to life in unexpected forward-thinking ways. And few professions turn so many ideas into so many realities." But the next sentence really hit a chord with me, Bob. It says, "Few have such a direct and positive impact on people's everyday lives. And we're counting on engineers and their imaginations to help us meet the needs of the 21st century." So I started thinking about it in our conversation today. And when I look up innovation, your name comes up all over the internet, by the way, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. So a lot of people are asking about the future of engineering. And I would say we can take poetic license with that. It's really not about the future of engineering, but it's engineering the future in a post-COVID world. So based on your experience and your life experiences, what are some of the big challenges that you see before us? What would you like to solve as an innovator, as an entrepreneur?
Well, let me go back a few sentences and answer why it's great to be an engineer. I try to answer everything in threes. So there's three reasons to be an entrepreneur that I love touting. One of them is it's fun. It's puzzle solving. And, if you do the New York Times crossword puzzle or you solve other puzzles, engineering is fun. Second of all, engineering pays well. Rarely will you find an engineer in a low-paid job. So if you'd like to be well paid, you should be an engineer. And the third reason is engineers, as you've just said, solve the world's problems, which is a very high, almost tautological. That is, the term engineer almost means somebody who solves the world's problems. It's not a narrow overlap. The distinction between scientist and engineer, I think, is overblown. I think it's a false dichotomy because most of the scientists, the really good scientists that I've seen are good engineers. And most of the good engineers are also good scientists. So that's part of the silos of academia, or that split, which I think is overdone. There's no shortage of problems. Every once in a while, someone gets the idea that we don't need to solve. We've solved all the world's problems. Every once in a while, that comes up. It's silly, of course. And so and you've already mentioned the problem that's most on everyone's mind is COVID. I think over time that will subside. I think we're overplaying the impact of COVID because we're in the midst of it and we don't know enough about it and it's full of fear. But I have confidence that COVID will be solved, and it'll be solved by engineers. The life sciences and engineering are converged now. So almost everybody in the life sciences is computational, and a lot of the methods of developing vaccines and cures come from an engineering point of view. In fact, that's the big news in life sciences. Life sciences is becoming decreasingly trial and error. Until about now, no one understands how drugs work until now. They just try them, and if they work, great, they approve them. And if they don't work, they don't approve them. And more we're engineering our cures and our drugs and our vaccines and so on. And that's why I think we're going to pull out of this COVID thing. And even though it sounds and feels horrible now, it will take its place and lower down. Anyway, so let's solve COVID. That's my first answer to your question about the future and big problems. And right behind that, I would put energy. Mm-hmm. That is, it's time to solve energy, and I've continued my work on that, and maybe later we can get back to energy. But we need, for a bunch of reasons, we need cheaper, cleaner, safer, abundant, ubiquitous energy. And there are many dimensions of solving that problem: solar, wind, fusion, geothermal, and so on. Solving the energy problem or problems, I think, is very high on the list. The internet, which I've been working on intermittently for 50 years, is, by the way, I've been a member of Eta Kappa Nu for 52 years, which is not quite half of its lifetime. But during that time, connectivity has been my business, not energy, but connectivity. And we've pretty much solved connectivity. We're not done yet, but let me overstate it and say we pretty much solved connectivity by inventing the internet. So let's do the same thing for energy. Let's solve energy and use much of what we've learned from building the internet. We should apply to solving energy. The internet itself has been very disruptive. A number of major industries have been completely changed. Voice, video, and data used to be separate industries, but we don't talk about that anymore because voice, video, and data are all data now. Actually, it's all video now. The internet was not built to carry video, but there it is. Most of the traffic on the internet is video. But the problems that the internet is going to take on, the disruptions that it's going to produce, are getting bigger now. And there's three big ones. So this is three areas of promise for engineers to make themselves useful. We need to solve energy, as I've already mentioned. That's one. So bringing the internet mindset to energy, I think it'll be a very effective approach. Well, for example, just as a slight example, when the internet got started, there was no storage in the internet because it had originally been built to carry voice. You didn't want any delay inside, so there was no storage. But of course, today's internet is just full of terabytes after terabytes of storage, even in your hand, let alone in the servers. Well, in energy, the same thing's happening. Energy storage has become one of the pivotal areas of progress and requirement. Of the three new things that the internet is pursuing, there's energy, as I've just mentioned, but then there's education. And we've just had a huge leap. We've slowly been moving education, let's call it brick and mortar education. We've been obsoleting that with online learning. And it's been moving and it's been slow and it's been denial and, it's just been going for people like me way too slowly. COVID has actually contributed to the acceleration of online learning because now you're not allowed to be in the same room. So, and guess what? All those people who said it would be impossible to teach over the internet are teaching over the internet now. So, so that's a silver lining on the COVID cloud, is that we've accelerated the movement from bricks and mortar education over to internet learning. And the third area of major challenge that the internet is going right at now is healthcare. I think there's a terrible mess, error prone, and the internet is slowly creeping into it now. And so standards will be developed, and health system is being revamped right now. And by the way, COVID is helping to accelerate that also. So those would be the three major areas that the internet is going to, engineers in the internet realm will be attacking those three major areas of solutions. How about that?
I think that's a fabulous segue to what I was going to ask you, which is, we talked about disruptive innovation. And, I was a dean for a number of years, Bob, and I remember sitting with my provost, and he'd always tell me, where is a good crisis when you need one, right? And here we are with COVID-19. And you talked about the disruption in higher education in particular. And you started out by saying when you joined Austin, Dean Fenves had told you about the city of Austin and breaking down silos and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about this gap between where we see researchers and how we commercialize it, right? Because that is something that I think a lot of faculty probably need some help doing. So can you talk a little bit about some of the exciting things that you're doing at Texas as a result of bridging this gap, if you will?
Well, I think the way I think about it, the modern research university, which is, there are many kinds of universities, and there'll be many more now that we're going online. But the modern research university, like this, just to name one, I'm an alumnus of MIT, so I like to name MIT. We often talk about the two roles of the university, teaching and research. And the way I address this problem that you pose, that is, how do we get more innovation, is that there's really a third leg to that stool. There's teaching, there's research, and there's, what do we call it, innovation or commercialization. Because if you're a professor, you teach students, you do research, but don't you want to have impact? You want to have impact with what you do. Now, some of the impact you get just by graduating students. You teach them and send them out to the world, and you have impact by sending them out into the world. Or you write papers, and you publish those papers, you have them reviewed and checked and double-checked and so on, and then you send those out into the world, and they get picked up by engineers in the field who then use that knowledge to do innovations. But how about having impact by directly seeding innovations? And the vehicle that I propose for that is called startups, where the goal of us think of a startup as a vehicle for taking an innovation and bringing it out into the world. And sometimes that startup will just become part of a larger company, and sometimes it will achieve escape velocity and become its own large company. The way I approach professors on this topic is to say there's really three things that professors should be doing, not two: teaching, research, and innovation. And the purpose of innovation is to make some use of the research that we produce. National science are proven to be very frustrated at the fact they spend so much money on research and a lot of it just sits on the shelf unexploited. And so they've been, the National Science Foundation has been working, created the Innovation Core for this very purpose, which is to help professors not that they have to become entrepreneurs or CEOs themselves. I mean, a frequent objection you'll hear to this way of thinking is that professors are terrible CEOs or terrible founders, and that's often the case. They often are. But the idea is not that the professor will immediately become CEO of the company, although they sometimes do, but you want to build a team around the faculty, around the research, and that team would include the founders of the company and the secret weapon there, by the way, which I've noticed, I don't know if others have noticed, is we have a plethora of postdocs. The number of postdocs has been going up and up and up and up and up, and their period, the time they spend at postdocs goes out and out and out. And the reason is they all want to be professors. And there just aren't enough professors' jobs to absorb all this onslaught of postdocs. But postdocs are the perfect people. They have in-depth knowledge of the field, and they've just finished doing some successful research in order to get their PhDs a year or two ago. And they're perfect for teaming up with business team members, entrepreneurs, CEOs, CTOs, and creating startups to take their research out into the world and have impact with it and do some good.
Wonderful, wonderful. As you were talking about faculty and this culture of teaching, research, innovation through commercialization, I came upon Hal Gregerson. I think you know who Hal is, who is the director of the MIT Leadership Center. And he talked about in an article where he says, brainstorming and question bursts is the best way for innovative leaders and problem solvers to find solutions. Asking and listening skills are essential to innovation, but leaders also need to observe, network, and experiment. reflect a little bit on that for me, Bob, on what you've experienced with the faculty. Because you mentioned there's a reason why you're working with faculty, so I'd just like you to reflect a little bit on that.
Well, your summary of Hal's contribution is perfect. I agree with every part of it. I tend to boil it further down. There are many factors, and this is very complicated, and it's highly statistical, so it's very hard to generalize about. But having said all that, I think the key is communication. And teaching our scientists and engineers how to communicate is the key problem. It's the nub of the problem. And there's a secret weapon to communication, and you've already mentioned it: listening. So the skill of listening is essential to communication, and communication toward solving life's problems. So I like to teach listening. Listening is hard to do. The hardest thing about listening is you have to stop talking. In order to listen, you really have to shut up, and that's so to do. We're so insecure that we keep talking because we're afraid of what the other guy might say if we ever stop and talking. So the first thing to learn about listening is to shut up and pay attention to what's going on. Now, by the way, small aside, one of the things I used to teach in our entrepreneurship lab was how to shake hands, because shaking hands has been traditionally, especially in the United States, a very important part of connecting with people and beginning the communication with them. And engineers are famous for being terrible handshakers. They grab the hand in the wrong way, or they use the wrong hand. So I used to teach. They would line up in the class, and I would want their shake and show them how you gotta make contact, get your hand up into, like the thumbs have to lock like this, and you need to look the person in the eye when you're shaking hands and all this stuff. And the students appreciated this because a lot of them hadn't ever thought how important it is in making that initial connection. But of course, thanks to COVID, I can't teach this anymore. Shaking hands is no longer allowed. So now the best you can do is elbow bumps. So I have to work some more on fleshing that out in my teaching. So to go back to your point, a key skill lacking in engineers that we need to be working, and we are working on. This is not a new idea. I've even endowed a professorship at MIT for the purpose of teaching engineers to communicate. And a lot of other people have done similar things. But it's very important. And what's the key of communicating?
Listening.
Yes, you see, I shut up and you talked. That's the way it works.
Wonderful. Well, you were talking about fist bumps and the new COVID culture. In a way, Bob, we're going back to my original background. I grew up in India, and I said, you put your hands together, and this is how you greet one another. So you make sure your hands are sanitized. Thank God for all the blessings we have. And as IEEE, we advance technology for humanity. So question, Bob, HKNu, and you mentioned, thank you so much. You were inducted in 1968, 52 years, remarkable record. And I think about HKNu's fundamental tenet, right? Academic excellence. So it comes with scholarship and grades and GPA, but it's really beyond all of that, right? It's beyond just your grades. And to me, IEEE's mission, advancing technology for humanity, that seems more meaningful now, more relevant now, more than ever before. You could almost start with A Tale of Two Cities, saying it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And Charles Dickens might very well be a member of the IEEE today. So if you could, and I know you're an inventor, so don't talk me out of that. So if you're an inventor, and let's say we invented a time machine, Bob, and we traveled back in time to 1968, the year that you were inducted into HKNu, what would Professor Metcalfe tell his 22-year-old self about the future?
Well, having gone back then, do I get to know then what I know now?
You can make all the assumptions, right? I mean, it's totally up to you.
If I knew then what I know now, I would learn how to sell much until my company, 3Com, needed me to be a salesperson in 1980, around 1980 or so, which was, I was 33 years old, so it was late in life. I would have preferred to have learned how to sell. And selling doesn't just mean selling tchotchkes or goods, or it starts with selling yourself as a person. So as an engineer, in order to make the most of your what you know, you need to know how to sell yourself, how to convince people to fund your projects, how to convince your buddies to join you in a project. So personal selling is sort of the beginning of it. And then there's product selling, which is very important. There's the road warriors who travel around the world selling products, and the death of a salesman type salespeople. And then there's the sales executives, VPs of sales. And being a sales executive is very different from being an actual salesperson. So those various selling skills, of which communication is part, I would urge the 1968 version of me to learn how to do that. The other thing I would advise, because it worked out for me, is I always chose to do what would make me the most money. So I chose to be a computer programmer because Raytheon was willing to pay me more than anybody else was. And I detected through my courses at MIT, the professors all said, I remember I had one fraternity brother said, you take 6251, which was MIT's course in system programming, and I will get you a job next fall at Raytheon. So I took the course and I got the job, and of course that may not have been a good idea because I was then full-time employed for the rest of my college career. And I used to work midnight to 8. That was, I don't know when I slept. So I know some people will be horrified at this, but I chose to always make the most money. My sophomore year, I showed my dad my paycheck, and he said, "You're now making more than I am." And he was proud. He wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. He was proud that he had arranged to send me into a system where I could then generate value, and I was then paid more than he was. He was a technician, never went to college, so he wasn't paid very much, but I was paid more. So suggest people that how you're going to. I take making money as a measure of adding value, and that is it. And the more value you can add, people are willing to do it in that exchange of values there. Another thing I'd suggest is if it isn't fun, you should stop doing it. So there are aspects of work where you, for example, if you have a job and it's no fun, you should leave. Don't stay. I tended to, in my various jobs, I would stay a year or 2 or 3 longer than I should have. For example, my own company, 3Com, I left in 1990. I should have left in 1987. Because those last 3 years were not nearly as fun or as productive as the preceding years. So if you're not having fun, you or anything, but you need to fix it, because it's no good going through life not having fun.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. I mean, you've hit upon a lot of, I think, insightful ideas for our students, for our professionals. You talked about the future, and connectivity, I think, is really the thread that goes across energy, across education, across healthcare. And if you're a student, there's jobs available, jobs that we don't know exist today, but jobs that you will create as you go out there. I'm going to turn as we get to the end of the... Go ahead, Bob.
Can I use the
Please.
phrase time machine a couple of times?
Yes.
And that's a very important term. So in 1980-ish, I made a slide telling people they should buy my products, 3Com's products, my company's products, because they were valuable. They would grow valuable as the square of the number of them that you bought. And they believed me, and they bought them, and my company was successful. But that initial slide, people, which I produced as a marketing executive, people have suggested maybe I was lying to my customers by promising that the network would be valuable. And the answer was I wasn't lying, because I'd had a time machine. And my time machine was the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, which allowed me to go out into the future 10 years and put PCs on local area networks and interconnect them with routers and everything. And then when I came to go start my company, I came back into the present, but I knew what happened over the next 10 years. I had a time machine. So I'm sorry, maybe I've gone too long, but I wanted to build on your use of that. If you can find if you want to have impact and you want to start a company and have impact with your research or your engineering, it's always good to have a time machine of some kind that allows you to see into the future and bring back your secrets to make you successful.
Wonderful. And I think, Bob, you may have answered this question. It says, what are the top 3 characteristics an engineer needs to grow a startup to success? Number 1, have a perspective that's forward-looking, I would say, and a time machine, right? Here's another question for you, and I know we're getting a little late on time here. How does a student or young professional, Bob, in IEEE parlance is somebody who's 15 years from graduation, how can they help break down the silos you mentioned earlier? Could they have real impact on the way institutions work?
Well, internet's going to help. Is you need to know something outside your field, and then you become multidisciplinary, and it's become easier and easier to learn things outside your field, because less and less our education is aimed at degrees from established universities over a 4-year period of time, having been preceded by 13 years of K-12. That's less and less the model, and more the model is lifelong learning. So you can, as I have, taken up, my new interest is energy, which we haven't talked about yet, by the way. And so I'm learning as much as I can about energy. And by the way, I never took any courses in thermodynamics. But I can now, I have yet to, but I could now take a course in thermodynamics and probably taught by the best thermodynamicists in the world right now. And it probably cost me $400, not $40,000. So one of the ways to get effective is to get multidisciplinary, because a lot of innovations are multidisciplinary. And a good way to do that is to learn stuff outside your field. And the internet is evolving to make that possible, more possible every day.
Wonderful. And I think, you hit upon a lot of things today during our conversation: systems thinking, interdisciplinary, being willing to listen, having a forward-thinking perspective, and so forth. I don't see any other questions on the Q&A panel. Let me ask Stacy, are there any other questions from the audience, Stacy, that you'd like me to address before we thank Bob for this really illuminating discussion? We could have this for 3 hours, Bob. I'd love to hear your thoughts on our energy future, because I think that's going to be the key to jobs. That's going to be the key to innovation in the years ahead. So.
Can I talk about that right now?
Yes, sir. Yes, you may.
So we have a question.
Yeah, we can go
Do we
ahead
have
and
any
go over
questions?
it.
I'd love to talk about my new enthusiasm. We need to solve energy. We need energy that's, whenever energy is cheap and abundant, our economies grow. And when energy becomes expensive, our growth stops. So we need cheaper, cleaner, safer, more abundant energy. And there's a bunch of ways we're getting at that. Solar energy, wind, fission, fusion, coal, oil, gas. There's a whole bunch of them. We need to be pursuing all of them in parallel. And the one that has attracted my attention is geothermal energy. The Earth, a lot of the reason we burn fossil fuels is to create heat. But the Earth is already hot. In fact, too hot, I guess we're arguing. But at the center of the Earth, it's molten rock, and it's the temperature of the surface of the sun. And that heat is constantly moving to the surface and being radiated out into space. So geothermal energy is energy that captures that heat directly. So you don't have to burn anything. You just collect the heat directly and then use that heat, say, to drive a turbine to create electricity or to directly heat or cool your house or so on. And it's clean, hugely abundant. There's, in fact, who was it? The Union of Concerned Scientists did a study of this, and they concluded that the amount of heat energy in the very thin sliver of the outer surface of the Earth, that's going down 10 kilometers, is 50,000 times the amount of energy available from all known oil and gas reserves. I mean, it's just limitless energy. And it's clean because you're not burning anything. And so we're working on that, and a bunch of us are working on it. And I just recently joined, and I'm learning furiously. But our goal is high. Our goal is the baseload electric production using heat, which is a form of geothermal energy. It's the extreme form. So drilling down 10 kilometers, so you got to know how to drill, and achieving temperatures that say be good because you could convert energy, that kind of heat into baseload electricity through a turbine. And so of course, you have to. The one big problem is drilling is expensive. It's hard to go into a rock and make a hole in it. So there's a lot of expertise in drilling and in the production and the conversion of the energy. One of the key aspects of a strategy that we're pursuing at the University of Texas is, instead of being, I'll take a risk and use clever language here, instead of being a hippie clean energy person who hates the oil and gas industry, and anybody from Houston, Texas is the enemy, take the opposite point of view, which is the problems that need solving to harvest geothermal energy. The people best qualified to do that work in the oil and gas industry. So the winning strategy, I think, going forward is partnering with oil and gas industry, hating them, which has been pretty much the model until about now. So the oil and gas people, they've learned how to frack, and we can improve on the fracking. They've learned how to the United States is now energy independent because of technological advances coming mostly out of Houston, Texas. And they know how to drill, and they know how to convert. They know scale thermodynamics. So that's my new project. And of course, my standing in the field is we're going to do this with startups. So that's how I get to play, because I'm somewhat of an expert on startups, not an expert in thermodynamics. So getting startups to light a fire under the oil and gas industry, and later to partner up. Yeah. Anyway, that's my latest project, is solving energy using deep geothermal.
Fascinating, Bob. In fact, there was a question, where can they learn more about it? I bet you if they go to the University of Texas Austin site, they can probably find more information on the work that's going on. The technical
URL is texasgeo.org or texasgeo.org. Thanks for letting me say that.
And I would also say, Bob, as you think about the surface of planet Earth and the oceans that we have, the idea of ocean thermal energy conversion is another aspect that has been looked at. Again, it comes down to safe, clean, affordable, and inexpensive, right? Because we need to be able to produce this locally and not have to rely on this massive transmission grid with its associated losses and costs and so forth. How can we produce this locally so that we can sustainably develop education, healthcare, communications, all of those things, right? I mean, it used to be reading, writing, arithmetic, and I'd say add energy to that. You need power, you need electricity. IEEE's got a very small program, IEEE Smart Village, that we've been doing for the last decade. Started with Ray Larson. John Nelson is now chairing that initiative. But it's bringing power locally, which then opens up the door. And you're absolutely right, energy, connectivity, education, healthcare. That's a fascinating time to be an engineer. And, what a wonderful, wonderful way to kick off Founders Day, HKNu, Bob. I mean, you've, no pun intended, you've lit the fire. I know the audience reaction is going to tell me, wow, we've got ideas. Students, if you were taking notes, there's jobs aplenty. All you got to do is listen. Listen, observe, experiment.
Can I share I happen to know the secret of happiness. Can I slip that in here?
Go for it.
I learned this quite a while ago. The only thing you need to be happy is something to be enthusiastic about. And I recommend you be enthusiastic about engineering in general, but also in particular enthusiastic about your branch of engineering, whatever you pursue. By the way, geothermal energy might be a good thing to pursue.
And I can't but slip this in myself here. As in a recent campaign, my slogan was "I care," and I classified it, Bob, by saying to be inclusive, to be collaborative, to be accountable, to be resilient, because you need to be resilient to innovate in the face of adversity, and to be ethical. So let's care, let's enjoy HKNu, and let's put our hands together as we do, and thank Bob for an amazing, amazing half an hour. Great insights, sir. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over back to our host, Stacy and Johanna. Thank you very much.
Well,
Thank you.
Ramesh. This is Nancy Osten, the director of HKNu. So thanks so much, Bob, for answering my call when I asked. And you come, thank you. You're amazing. This was an amazing talk. And Ramesh, as always, just been a wonderful advocate for HKNu. Thank you so much. I can enthusiastically say this has been an awesome session.